Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa, Idris, with me Sharaad, Kuttan, and we're chatting tonight to Faroze Nadar, Executive Director at Global Compact Network Malaysia, the local chapter of the UN Global Compact Network. So Faroze, just before the break, you talked a little bit about using the right language to communicate this. And I'm just wondering whether, as a whole in Malaysia, there is an understanding of what the SDGs are when it comes to the business community.
Right. I think as a whole, at a very top level, people understand that the Sustainable Development Goals is important for business. Right?
I mean, we've all heard about it in the periphery.
We've seen the beautiful 17 colours and things like that, right? But herein lies, I think, one of the issues with SDGs and business. It is not written in business speak. So, for example, if you talk about ending poverty, right? No CEO will disagree that, yes, we've got to contribute to this. However, how does this relate to their business? So, in my opinion, ending poverty in the business speak, for example, is everybody paid minimum wage. But however, is that enough? Right now, we're talking about living wage, right? So until and when the right words are used from a business perspective, it always be something that, it's a global agenda, but how do we plug into this?
Okay.
Yeah. All right. I do want to ask you, though, when we think of something as important as the climate crisis that we're suffering, does voluntarism work? Voluntarism is based on the idea that people are much more likely to actually do what they say they're going to do if it's voluntary. That it's because it's non-coercive, it's actually it coheres with our more democratic and liberal sensibilities, right? But when you have a crisis, what's your personal opinion? Do you think we can continue with this voluntaristic approach to this issue? Do you think we need?
I think a stronger action is definitely needed.
For instance, it has to be mandatory.
Mandatory, yes, of course, that is the best way to do it. But I think more important, rather than just saying that we want to do it, a commitment has to be made and publicly made. So at the global level, we have recently launched something called the Business Leaders Ambition for 1.5 degrees. We are taking this a step beyond just pledging that, yes, businesses need to go hand in hand against this climate crisis. What are we going to do for this? So there's two things that they can do by joining this pledge. One is either they set a science-based target to reduce their emission vis-a-vis their their carbon footprint. Second is they commit towards net zero, right? So the second part for Malaysian companies may be a bit difficult. However, the science-based target is very achievable. So we need to stop saying that, yes, we want to be sustainable, we have to support this. The question is how? Yeah, okay. Set a target, tell us publicly.
And how would you characterize the local businesses' support and reaction towards the climate crisis? How have they responded?
I would say lukewarm. Simply because, again, we may be a bit removed from the whole climate crisis things that's happening in front of our faces. Right? We are, as you know, Malaysia is very blessed. We don't get this extreme climate kind of things. But yet. So we are a bit insulated. Therefore, we are not very proactive in working this out. We seem to be very reactive. But again, that's because we have not translated it from a strategic perspective. I think the government is doing some great initiatives in trying to predict and be a bit more proactive in coming to a climate agenda. So, for example, one thing that was recently discussed about was the Energy Efficiency Act. I think in most private sector, energy is the closest component that they can have in relation to climate, right? So once they understand that, okay, energy that we use day to day is a big component, how do we behave better in this?
And they are one of the biggest contributors, right?
Biggest contributors as well. So it has to be hand in hand for the Malaysian private sector. We are kind of like let's wait and see, or who tells us how to do it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And I wonder, you talked about the ecosystem earlier as a way of actually getting the SMEs to respond, right? Because if they're having to sell to a market like a European market where standards are very high, then they will conform just because it's good business practice, right? So is that the way that we should be thinking about, that there will be in this world leaders who are going to set standards and who are going to maintain that in a mandatory fashion, or voluntary one, and everybody's going to have to follow. But is there a role for Malaysia to become a leader, for SMEs or businesses here to think of themselves, other than just followers, to think of themselves as in a leadership position?
Right. I think to your first point, I agree. At the end of the day, private sector is very incentive-driven, whether it is the carrot or the stick, right? So when there is a standard set by a big buyer, yes, everybody would conform. But does Malaysian companies have a role to be leaders? I absolutely think so. Of course, it's sectorial. We can't be leaders in everything. For example, like the palm, I think naturally we are seen as leaders in sustainable palm oil, right? Usually when you say you're buying from a Malaysian palm oil company, the perception is a rather less risk compared to buying elsewhere. But I think there's also new domains that we can look at. So for example, like the electronical industry, now human rights is a big thing.
Right.
How can we be setting the scenes as leaders in terms of good governance in supply chains and things like that? So that it is possible, but I think the issue is that what is the standard of leadership when it comes to sustainability? There are many different caveats or understanding of this is how you be a leader, or this is the framework, this is the scoring, this is the methodology. So what is the right standard? I think that's something that is still being discovered. Yeah.
Right, but also, I mean, what is the right standard in measuring a company's impact on SDGs, right? There's no, I guess, no standard metrics that measure the impact of a company's SDG, compliance in a way.
Or is there?
Or is there?
I mean, there are a number of ways that is measured. I feel if the PLCs in Malaysia, they use the FTSE for Good as a benchmark.
As benchmark,
right?
okay.
Globally, they've got the Dow Jones Sustainability Index as a benchmark. But again, how then do you drive this across the supply chain? You can't hold a Dow Jones standard to a SME.
Correct.
And as you correctly mentioned out, they are the backbones of our economy. But the SME will ask, do I follow buyer A or buyer B or buyer C? So this is something that we've had in discussion with a number of government agencies. What is a right sustainability standard for the private sector? It's something that we are exploring. But in my mind, we don't need to create this. There are a lot of existing standards out there, whether it is from a certification viewpoint or as a voluntary basis. So we need to pick what matches the Malaysian narrative and set that as an example for us to follow.
What about the possibility that imposing these standards will actually increase costs and make our goods and services less competitive? I mean, is there a fear that you're actually going to be adding costs to production and that could be a disadvantage?
I mean, anything new will definitely add a cost. And I think that's one of the biggest hindrance for private sector to embark on being sustainable. Right. At the end of the day is, what's my ROI for
financial
doing this,
lens,
the financial
right?
lens kind of things. But I think the issue is that we are not putting financial lens on things that we don't traditionally treat as a P&L issue, right? So when a risk happens that you cannot sell to a particular market because you are not conforming to human rights issue, now what is that opportunity lost for not being able to do future business? If you look at the palm oil sector, if you don't have the RSPO certificate, many buyers don't want to buy for you, and that's a loss of opportunity as well. So I think there is an investment, there is a cost, but it must be treated as an investment. It must be seen that way.
Well, that's a tough sell. We're going to come back and continue. I have a follow-up question for that, but we have to take a quick break and we'll be right back. So don't go anywhere. Stay with us on Consider This.